Or, no, you don't have to go home. Well, I'm here. I'm ready. Where the heck's the rest of the group?
I know. It's time to
Huh? Hit the door. Get out of here. Well, they can stay. They just can't be real loud. Jennifer. Did your daughters go to the meeting after the other day? Okay. We were sitting there Wednesday evening, and I swore, standing in front of you, were your two daughters. I just kept staring at him, going. I know, I had to look away every now and then. I swore they were two daughters. Hey, where's the department? The head guy, was he drop all this on you? What? Probably enjoying himself and all that. Do we have a plug I can plug this into? Is it not there? Whoa. Remember?
Make sure I have the right answer. Cool. All right. Let's see if I'll have enough juice. I should probably plug it in. Dang it. It's like I have to take a gas. Looks like it is. There we go. Thank you. No, just be yourself. Grab it.
No, I'm very good.
Just curl your hair a little bit more. That's okay. One of the times that Autumn's out in the basement, they just got the house all the other things we're working on. Something that's my mom was
I might have a question.
Yeah.
What were they doing outside in the street area? I drove by the other day. There was
Here at the
trucks.
corner?
Yeah.
So, it's the craziest thing. So they came in to do the inspection for the fire suppression system. There was a break in the main fire suppression main. So they had to dig it up. It was 8 feet
I
down.
saw them dig it when I drove by. Oh my
8
God.
feet down to replace that. Isn't
Wow.
that crazy?
Yeah.
It just, I mean, just out of nowhere.
Well, that's good that we do inspections then.
Oh, yeah. So
I was
but
just curious because I
they
saw.
said that that pipe was like 50, 60 years
Oh, yeah,
old. So,
sure. Yeah.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Neither, thank you. Thank you anyway. Great job, though.
And the plate? And the plasticware? What more do I want out of them? I might as well go home on this far ahead. I might get charged for it later on.
I think we got a lot of
Well, that's what I thought.
Hey, Chris? She needs a time frame for how long our.
Right now, I got 3 grandkids, 2 dogs, everybody else running around the house at home. So.
Did you hear me?
I heard. They don't need any more cooking sugar or anything else. Oh, Lexi walks in the door and she's like, I'm home.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
You tell my wife, I'm home.
How's your baby?
Getting big already?
That's good. That's what they're supposed to do.
I know.
So
Just turn your mic.
Very good. So cute. Dr.
Oh, there it is. All right, let me log in. Let's make it officiale.
Thank you.
Superintendent work session.
And they're all saying,
Oh, that's for Vanessa. So, but Aaron's got 2 girls and a boy? Is that right?
and Laura,
Right.
Gotcha. So I just need to get
Oh, nice.
everything
What,
started.
she's
Correctamundo.
gotta be
Everybody?
13?
Oh, Elisa's over there. Falconiche tomorrow.
I don't know why she's not. But she told
Yes.
there's not illness with Vanessa. No. Just need time to type. All right. Don't worry about it. No. Welcome, everybody. I guess I will move to 2.01, the President's Report. Sound like a plan? All right, wow, we have a full list of events that are coming up. August the 11th through the 17th, we have new employee orientation. August the 11th at 7:30 in the morning, we have new employee breakfast in the lower lobby. On August the 12th, we have our Board of Education business meeting in the boardroom at 7 p.m. August 18th through the 23rd, district building professional development for teachers and teacher workdays. August the 18th, we have staff convocation, 8:30 a.m. on Moore Field. 8:23, transition day for students coming into our schools. 8:25, the first day of the 2021-2022 school year. August the 28th, we have the Husky Support Center grand opening, black and orange back to school bash and the color run. September 2nd, we have our board superintendent work session at 7 p.m. in the boardroom. Then we celebrate Labor Day, September the 6th. No school pre-K-12 district close. Are we going to be having our fireworks for that?
Yeah, community fireworks, September 5th.
September 5th. Okay. I just know that kind of comes in there. Then we have September the 9th, Board of Education business meeting, 7 p.m. in the boardroom. And then we will move to 2.02, returning to learning plan with Dr. Chris Kilbride.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. So I'm here tonight to talk on the return to learning plan for the 21-22 school year. There's going to be two parts to the presentation. The first is some of the background context, some of the data from a community survey, actually two community surveys that were administered over the course of the summer, a little bit of feedback from the Return to Learning Committee, and then we'll be getting into the return to learning plan for 21 and 22. If you remember, our first day of school, I think as Dr. Alvin had just shared, is the 25th of August. So our district vision to develop leaders recognized for academic excellence and produce graduates who will become productive citizens, leading lives of personal integrity and fulfillment. Our mission is to enable every student to think critically, solve problems, and develop the knowledge and skills necessary for success in our diverse and global society. And if you ever wonder where every student every day comes from, it comes right from our mission. So the presentation around return to learning, the connection to our equity statement, which was board approved last year. Board members Evelyn Gilliam and I will be making a presentation in September because each year the equity statement will be reapproved. The connection to the equity statement around the return to learning plan is to commit to building positive, purposeful relationships with every student and every family so that barriers to learning at high levels are removed, to treat everyone with dignity and respect, and to prioritize interactions with every parent, student, guest, and colleague. And so just know, and I think you do know, there's been a huge amount of engagement around the return to learning plan. I know that board members, you've engaged with a number of members in the community. I've engaged with a number of members of the community as well as the staff in putting this return to learning plan together. So first on the survey that was put out on July 27th. This was the second survey that was pushed out. It was open from Monday the 27th. And it closed later that week. It was open for a total of 3 days. There were 1,700 responses. The survey that was pushed out in June, we had 1,540 responses. You can see that it was weighted about 75% towards parents and guardians, about 25% towards staff. It was a simple survey. Got a great response from the community. Who am I? Am I a staff member, a parent, guardian, etc.? What is my comfort level around masking? Is it to require masks all time indoors and outside? Is it to require masks all time indoors but voluntary outside? Or is it voluntary masking at all times? And then some similar questions around social distancing. Here are the survey findings that we garnered. So we saw a significant departure or difference in the July survey as opposed to where it was in June. Question, since June, the percentage, or the statement, since June, the percentage of staff and families who would prefer voluntary masking to start off the school year had dropped from nearly 50% to 26, or about a quarter of families who say they're comfortable with voluntary masking. The June survey, nearly 60%, or right at 60% of staff report a level of comfort with voluntary masking that was almost cut in half, down to 36%. Some of the rationale for that could be the Delta variant, could also be some of the findings where even vaccinated persons are testing positive, seeing more and more evidence of that. And so as those two issues were coming about, we went back out to the community to get the community feedback around how to start school. Moving beyond masking to social distancing, the percentage of families and staff who are comfortable with no social distancing. In June, 40% of families reported being comfortable with no social distancing inside or outside. That dropped down to about a quarter. And you can see a similar drop as it relates to staff, whereas in June, almost 50% of staff reported a level of comfort with no social distancing. Putting this information into a graph form, what we found is that for families, the families overall in the community, 66% or 2/3 of families support mandatory masking. It's a 40% decline in the family respondents who earlier supported voluntary masking. As it relates to staff, in June, 60% of staff members supported voluntary masking. Now, 64% of staff support mandatory masking. So, survey findings at a high level, high school families had the highest percentage of respondents saying they would like voluntary masking at about 30%. That, while at 30%, it had dropped, almost cut in half from 55.9 when that same question was asked back in June. At the early childhood level, early childhood staff had the highest percentage reporting a level of comfort with voluntary masking at 39%. Back in June, that number was almost near 64% as well. As we get into the elementary school, where were elementary families regarding mask wearing? At the SEC and elementary level, a total of 73% of families who responded desired mandatory masking. Board members, this is a 38-slide presentation. The presentation was uploaded prior to the meeting. I'm not going to cover every slide, but I'm just going to hit the high-level points. All of the presentation slides are in there for you to view. When we asked middle school families around masking in July, 75% of middle school families desired mandatory masking. And at the high school level, in July, 70% of high school families desired mandatory masking. As it relates to social distancing, the definition of social distancing has varied over the months and years of the pandemic. As defined by the CDC, current recommendations around social distancing is at least 3 feet. At the early childhood level and elementary, they had the highest percentage of respondents saying that they would be comfortable with no social distancing. In effect, at about a quarter, this had dropped almost in half from where it was at June, where 46.5% of elementary and SEC families reported a level of comfort with no social distancing. As it relates to staff, SEC and elementary staff had the highest percentage of respondents saying they preferred no social distancing at 40.7. When we go through the buildings at the elementary level and the SEC, I think it makes sense. That's where it is definitely the hardest to socially distance when teachers are with our earliest learners. So we saw a slighter drop in the July responses where there were more than the majority of the staff at that level were recommending no social distancing. So overall, the range in family responses around social distancing, families that the responses ranged from 62% at SEC and elementary up to a high at 78% at the middle schools, where some form of social distancing, whether indoors or out, the responses leaned much more towards social distancing indoors with an attempt at 3 feet. is what families were responding to. And with the lowest percentage at the SEC at 62, highest percentage at middle at 78, with the high school coming in at 75%. And all of the slides is just all of the data that Doug Bray and his team compiled from the surveys both in June and July. And board members, I think being responsive to the data, if the data would have continued in the same way that it was back in June, board members, we were on a path towards voluntary masking. It was supported by families, it was supported by staff, but unfortunately, as the pandemic has proven to pivot pretty often now, the data just no longer supports that approach of voluntary masking in schools. So all of the slides are here. It's all broken down by level. I've given the high level of overview of all of the information from the survey. I have had conversations with the Return to Learning Committee. We had a meeting at the end of July. The committee met to process some of these results. The information was shared. And then there was questions to the Return to Learning Committee around where they were around masking and social distancing. And I will say the Return to Learning Committee, it's a group of people that are committed to the work, committed to doing what they believe to be in the best interest of Ritenour students and staff. The committee is quite divided. The committee was divided when it was first implemented, remains pretty divided where there's not a consensus that is coming together. As it was around masking, the committee was pretty fairly split amongst those members of the committee that were recommending voluntary masking in light of this data, as well as those members of the committee that were recommending mandatory masking. The feedback was slanted much more towards members of the community that were recommending voluntary masking, and it was much more slanted towards staff members who were recommending mandatory masking. As it relates to social distancing, we saw a similar dynamic. At this point, I can stop, answer questions that you might have before I get into the updates to the Return to Learning Plan.
I have a question. I saw there was 1,704 surveys returned. Is that on both of them or just on the first one?
Yeah, so that was 1,704 on the second. In June, it was 1,540.
Okay. And what is our community data as far as people catching the variant? We don't have that information, do we?
So are we talking about the Ritenour community, staff and students?
No, I'm talking about our community, our area, the whole Ritenour district area.
Yeah, so what we have is St. Louis County. What we don't have at this point is I can't tell you the rate of spread within our 9 municipalities. I can't tell you the rate of spread in the 9 square miles. I can tell you that at St. Louis County right now, the positivity rate is 12.4%. The transmission rate is 1.14. Anything north of 1 indicates that the spread is increasing. The data that I always reported out to the Return to Learning Committee around, which did break out our 3 zip codes, that report is not being published at this point. So I don't have the good data on that, Ruth. And I also, at this point, don't have data on students and staff. We do have kindergarten camp that's going on. Kindergarten camp has been in place this week, fully masked with students and staff. We've had no incidents during kindergarten camp, but we do know that on the 11th, so just in 6 days, we are going to be welcoming about 60 new employees. On the 18th, the week after, we're going to be welcoming 870 staff back when our staff returns for the first day of work. And then on the 25th, we're going to be welcoming about 6,100 students back. So I think once we get students and staff back, we'll have better data to speak about the number of incidents that we have with students and staff, because, using the past as a guide, we will have incidents. where we will have positive cases among students. We will have cases of positive incidents amongst staff. But at this point, all indications point to the fact that being fully masked is a way to try to mitigate some of that.
I noticed that you said that the community members were more in favor of the voluntary, and I think we need to remember that our community members are our stakeholders. We are here for them, and so I think their opinion weighs more. I think voluntary masking is the way to go, because I think that some good points, our children will get sick, adults do get sick. We have all these other things in place. We know what happened when we stopped, having school, kids around each other. We know all the things that we learned from last year that were not positive. And I think if it's voluntary, I think people who are worried will wear the mask. And I think that we need to take our stakeholders' opinions and wants and concern, especially since we have no data that shows that we have a lot of this in our district. So that's my concern.
No data around positivity rate here in
Right.
the community.
Yeah, St. Louis County is a big, big area. We're just a little tiny part of that. And,
So it's a good point. One of the things that it adds to the complexity also is the fact that people travel all over the place. People travel to St. Charles County, to Lincoln County, to Jefferson. And so, it would be a perfect scenario. We just had a wall around our 9 square miles and we could guarantee nobody would come or go. The idea that there would be no contamination would allow us, I think, to move towards voluntary masking much more quickly. But I think at this point, with where we are with community spread, which right now is high, St. Louis County is rated as a high level of community spread. One of the factors that we would take into consideration for moving to voluntary masking is when we would move away from that level of high community transmission.
well, we kind of said we were going to do that last year and we never did, and till the very end, and yet the school districts that stayed open wound up having more success. Their kids were not as depressed or whatever, over not being able to be at school and with their own peers. And I don't think that they had anything desperately terrible, even though that they were all in school the whole year. And I think that we need to, think more about our stakeholders and what they want. And I think it's great that we had 1,700 people respond, but that's only a small percentage of the whole thing, of our whole district. It's like 1/5.
Sorry, can I ask a question? The voluntary masking for July says 26%.
What'd you say?
The voluntary masking for July says 26%.
Right.
Okay. So 74% were not in favor of voluntary.
Of the people who responded.
Yeah.
Right. So.
One of the factors to consider as well is we're able to have modified quarantines when we do have a mask mandate in place. That means if there is a positive case in the classroom, we're able to implement contact tracing, and then only those people that would be quarantined would meet that criteria of a close contact. If we go to voluntary masking and there are unmasked people in the classroom, at that point, the ability to have a modified quarantine and not quarantine the entire classroom, that goes away. So we're committed to having 5 days a week school. The only way that we would go back to virtual learning would be if a school hits 5% positivity. We have a small number of students that have chosen full virtual learning, 378 to be exact, have chosen the Ritenour Virtual Academy, 1st grade through 12th grade. We have more families that are starting to choose MOCAP. But other than that, we have 5 days a week school, which, as Ruth had mentioned, we never got to last year. We ended the year with 4 days in person and 1 day virtual. We're 5 days in person. We want to be able to keep that. And we believe at this point, with starting with a mask mandate, allowing for that modified quarantine, that's the way to keep the most kids in person to avoid having to clear out and quarantine an entire classroom.
That was going to be my question, is what are the quarantine rules? So what happens if somebody does test positive?
So if somebody does test positive, we would work through the contact tracing process, which involves Dr. LaChance and Ms. Hahn and our health professionals in all of our schools. Work to identify close contacts. If we're in a situation where there are unmasked, potentially unvaccinated people in a classroom, that modified quarantine is no longer an option. So if we have a class size of 20, class size of 22, strong likelihood that nearly that entire classroom could be quarantined.
And what does that quarantine look like?
Could be a period of 5 to 7 days. It's also dependent on whether or not students can be symptomatic. But as I said, we were away from 5 days of in-person instruction for more than a year. And we believe at this point, the way to get as much of that in-person 5 days a week instruction is to implement masking and the social distancing. Now, when would we move away from that? It's hard to say what specific number. The goal is not to keep a mask mandate in place forever. But it's also keeping a close eye on data sources, CDC recommendations. The reason that I don't believe going with a specific number is appropriate is one of the factors that's causing not only me, but also the majority of districts across St. Louis County with starting the years with masks, is the fact that there are fully vaccinated persons that are testing positive and end up getting quarantined. So, that's a key factor that not only led the CDC, but also the education collaborative. So Education Plus, the independent schools of St. Louis, as well as the health committee to make that recommendation because there are fully vaccinated people that are testing positive and having to get quarantined. It added an additional degree of concern to having unmasked people. It wasn't just people that are choosing not to get the vaccine that are spreading. It's also people that are fully vaccinated that are spreading as well. So they recommend layering of strategies, masking, social distancing. When people are sick and symptomatic, students or staff, they need to stay home. And then also keeping up with cleaning and disinfecting. Having all of those strategies in place can limit the spread.
If they're quarantined 5 to 7 days, what does that mean? Are they just at home? Do they have the online? What do they have?
So if a student is quarantined at home, we were actually working through that conversation today. We think we may have a bit of a different plan than where it was last year. One of the things that we're seeing this year is our enrollment is lower, especially at kindergarten. So the number of kindergarten students that we anticipated, 518. Right now, we have less than half of our expected kindergartners that have enrolled. So what are some reasons for why that's happening? Is it families that are keeping an eye on the pandemic and the potential spread? That could be one of the reasons. But one of the conversations we're having is looking at those teachers who currently don't have a classroom that could step in and serve students who are on quarantine in a virtual manner. One of the things that we avoided last year was having a teacher teach virtually and then a teacher assistant or a sub cover the class in person. We avoided that. We're attempting to avoid that again this year. And instead, with these kindergarten teachers that right now don't have a classroom, they'd be serving the kids that would be on quarantine.
If children are masked, they're in a room with somebody that tests positive, do they get quarantined?
Dr. LaChance, do you care to speak on that? Student is masked in a room where a student is positive.
Not necessarily. We would do contact tracing to see if they were within close contact at any point within 2 days prior to that student testing positive or 2 days prior to them even having symptoms. And then if the student is vaccinated and not symptomatic, the guidelines are that they would not quarantine and they're recommended to get tested to see if they're if they are positive to the virus. If they are, then they would go, if they were a contact, if they test positive, either of those, or have symptoms, they would be quarantined until they're no longer testing positive, which varies by person. The one issue that we're also finding is sometimes the students were in contact with someone at home who's not a student, not a staff member, is positive. And that's even more challenging because their quarantine doesn't start until they stop contact with that family member. So sometimes that can be a while.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I think that the, the survey, 1,700 people, I realize compared to the community, that's low, but to me, that tells me that those are 1,700 people that are really paying attention to what's going on, and they want to give their opinion, whether they're a parent or live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of kids. I don't know. I think that those are, that's an important point. It's like saying people don't vote, but a lot of times the people who don't vote, they don't know what's going on and they don't pay attention to things. So, it can work both ways. It would be nice to have more people respond to a survey, but I believe that those people are the people who are really the most interested in what's going on in the schools, and I want to see this 5-day-a-week work. And it does concern me. I don't like the idea of telling people the students, whatever, they have to wear a mask in general, but to me, it just seems the safest way right now. And I also know of two things. One, a lot of students who go here, at least at the high school level, whose parents won't allow them to be vaccinated. And I also know a lot of people that have gone on trips, like they've gone out of state, certainly out of town. And a lot of them do that in late July or in August, and you don't know, what they might have picked up there, even if our area here right now is safe. If they come back from a trip on the 20th, we don't know what could happen with them. So just to stay so totally safe, I think it's better to stick with the mask mandate for now.
And I guess the last thing that I would say is just, what are our nurses saying? Because I know that our nurses are participating in this with you and they're keeping a close eye on it and everything. And I'd like to know, what they recommend and say.
We have our lead nurse is on the Return to Learning Committee, and she was in support of mandatory masking as well as social distancing. Got an email from one of the team members last week that, when there are fully vaccinated people or people that are positive and are that don't have any symptoms, a lot of cases now of healthcare providers that are coming up positive. If we have a situation where we have nurses that test positive, and if we lose a nurse for a period of days or weeks due to a quarantine, that would significantly impact our ability to contact trace, because the nurses really are the front line in our buildings when we do have a symptomatic person or a positive person. So if we end up losing a healthcare provider to a quarantine, and now there's increased cases where a person is non-symptomatic, they're transmitting the virus, that happens to one of our nurses, it'll be a significant issue for us.
One last question. Are we offering testing at all?
Are we offering testing?
Yeah. At our, the health center?
So we're offering vaccinations. The next vaccination clinic that we have is on the 14th. We don't have testing on site at this point throughout the district. CARE STL will provide tests, but at this point, we're not offering them in a systematic way across the district.
Okay. I didn't know that they were going to be doing that at the health center.
Sure.
Do we have any data on vaccination rate of our staff?
We don't. That's not data that we've collected. There are some organizations in some districts that are collecting that data. We have not.
Okay. And just an observation, our community surveys that we do, we look at the validity rate in a survey. And that's the sampling compared to the amount of people that you have in your group. And we've had far, far less people in the community surveys in the past. And it's been a high validity rate then. So I would say that without doing the calculations or anything, there's 15 and 1,700 people there. That's a good sampling. And since it was a random sampling and everything, we sent it out to everybody and we got it back in a random way. That shows us a high validity rate. So the survey is giving us a true cross section of our community, whether we have 28,000 or 30,000. The 1,700 people is a true and good sampling of the survey.
Did the survey go out to the whole community? Was it random? Was it?
It was it should have been everybody.
It went out to 5,896 families.
All within the district that attend here? People that attend here, not
Yes.
the community. Kind of surveys you're referring to, Brad, went to
Well,
random, where we paid people to do, even people who don't have any kids. It was a whole district. That's a different thing than this.
But this still went out to people that are our stakeholders that
Right,
are the ones interested.
correct.
And to have a sampling of 1,700, 1,500 responses is pretty doggone good. Okay, if I did a survey and I got that kind of response, I'd be just over the moon about it. So even though, it'd be great to have 100% return on your sampling and survey every parent, woman, child, everything else, that'd be great. But I think this gives us a good measure to look at. And I know the discussion is, should we wear these masks on the first day of school? Should we not? What are the repercussions of not? What are the repercussions of doing so? Everybody has their own little crystal ball, and I don't know if any of us are going to be right or any of us are going to be wrong, but I think maybe at the start of it all, we should err on the side of caution. And then as school gets going and as everything gets going and everything, we could start looking more immediately at having it voluntary instead of waiting a month or 2 months or 3 months. But maybe for everyone's comfort level, our staff's included. I know as Ruth, as you said, okay, that our staff might not live here. They might live in St. Charles or wherever like that. And our stakeholders are the people that vote for us. But if we can't get the teachers in the classrooms, what are we doing for the kids? And if our staff isn't comfortable coming to the classroom, I know we don't have any surveys on that. Where's the balance? I wouldn't mind starting out with the mask mandate, but I think shortly thereafter we should look at then going to voluntary.
I think we can keep that on with the start of the mask, how many people might get sick with this COVID? Not just, how many might get sick and how many of our COVID? Because if it's very minimal for our district, then I think we need to reconsider.
I think the big thing is definitely trying to ensure that we have everybody in school 5 days a week. I think that's our main goal, and to try to keep everybody healthy. Right. And Chris, what's the magic number that you would be looking at in terms of the percentage? Would it be getting back down to 5% and just watching it?
Or
Well, you said it was 12.6% now?
That's in the county.
Oh, just in the county?
That's the county. We don't have any data for our district.
So, there is not a magic number. There are factors such as the spread of the variant. The new guidance is fully vaccinating people that are testing positive, asymptomatic people that are passing it. So, positivity rate could drop to 6%. But there's other recommendations from the CDC the American Academy of Pediatrics that have to be factored in as well. That's why trying to stay away from a magic number, not in an effort to try to delay anything,
Right.
but rather, we could say 7%, but the guidance could be, there's out of control spread here with asymptomatic, and we have to factor that in as well. So I wish it could be as easy as a magic number. Going into it last year, that's what I thought it was going to be. It was going to be a magic number. We were going to look at 3 data sources, and then those would be the key pieces of data that would help us make the decision. But another factor is that people have so many different sources of information that they look at. Whatever sources of information that people don't look at, they immediately think are invalid, and news not being accurate. So, yeah, we don't have a magic number as much as I'd like to have. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so board members, I'd like to share with you the updates to the Return to Learning plan for the 21-22 school year. So I see, and based on the dialogue, thank you for the dialogue and the perspectives. I know that you're very connected to the community, and I know there are a number of people in the community that do not support this decision. I know there are a number of people in this community that support this course of action, but I also want to give voice to those people that have been engaging with me on an ongoing basis around their thoughts that are more on the side of voluntary masking. I do believe it's in our best interest and our students and staff's best interest to start the year with masks and face coverings for all students and staff members while indoors in all Ritenour schools. Students pre-K to 12 would be expected to wear a face covering unless there's a medical reason the face should not be covered, as documented by a medical professional. So regardless of vaccination status, the why for that is the fact that, again, as I said, there are fully vaccinated people that are testing positive and spreading the virus. Outdoors, masking would be optional. Social and physical distancing would be at 3 feet, while indoors, that would continue to be the goal here in Ritenour. It's the goal. Can't guarantee it in all cases. We're a school district. We work with children. And so while we work towards a goal of 3 feet, we just can't guarantee that in all cases. We've put a lot of work into hand washing protocols, whether it be, hand washing or sanitizing. When entering classrooms before and after lunch, coming back in from recess, where there's not easy access to the hand washing stations, there are sanitizers, and everybody walked past a sanitizer station on the way in here. We would have 5 days a week in-person instruction, and we would also have all activities and athletics. So masks would not be required for students or staff outside while at recess or PE. Classes would not be separated during outdoor recess. We had a process in place last year where there were cohorts that went out to recess together. This year, we'll be moving more back towards the normal routine of recess. Brian Sanker is here tonight, our Director of Transportation. While on the bus, all students and all drivers would be expected to wear masks at all times. That's a federal mandate around public transportation. Drivers would have disposable masks on hand. They gave out many masks last year. They would continue to do so. Cleaning and disinfection would continue at high rates. We realize now that the way that spread occurs is through the air. There is the potential for spread to occur on surfaces, but it's much less of a concern as opposed to spread through the air. And I'd like to give kudos to Mr. Lindhorst and Mr. Smith and the operations department. Because we know that where spread occurs, it happens through the air. This space that we're in right now, the air handlers have been outfitted with ionizers that if there is a positive person in the room right now, the ionizers help to trap the virus particles and render them not as dangerous as they are. So kudos to Dwight and Mike and the team for putting these structures in place. We'll still have virtual options. We are one of a small number of St. Louis County districts that is offering our own virtual option. The vast majority of districts in the county are outsourcing their virtual options to either Launch or MOCAP. We have 378 students signed up for full virtual to start the year, and we do expect to continue a virtual option long beyond this pandemic. We're asking our families to monitor health at home. This is for students and for staff. So partnership with parents is going to be key. And if there is a symptomatic student at home, we need to make sure that that student does not come to school to put others at risk. And the final piece of the plan, while at school, we will not have temperature checks as students come into the buildings. We will work with parents and guardians to monitor student health before they come into the building. We had isolation rooms in all of our schools last year. We would be moving away from isolation rooms, and instead our nurse's office would be the isolation space. If there's already a student in the nurse's office, when a symptomatic student comes in, we would have seating for those students so that we would not have more than one student in the nurse's office at a time who was symptomatic potentially for COVID. A couple of other items that are not in the infographic but are in the return to learning memo that was shared. We would be returning to field trips. So we put a moratorium on all field trips. We would be implementing field trips again this year. If it's an indoor event, students would be and staff would be expected to mask. If it's outdoors, it would be mask optional. And then contact tracing would be a strategy that we would be continuing to implement through student services, human resource, and the nurses in our buildings. We would hope to communicate this out to staff and to the community tomorrow. We would be one of the last districts in St. Louis County to message out the intent around the return to learning for next year. Can answer any other questions you might have.
I'm sorry if I missed this. Do we have the disinfectant team still going, or is that just getting absorbed in with other work?
We do not have the separate disinfection team anymore. The majority of those people were absorbed into our evening crews or our day crews. So we do have disinfection that happens, but we no longer have the separate team that was made up of majority bus drivers.
I appreciate the work and you guys getting together with both the staff and the community on this and giving them each a chance to say what they want. And I think this is a good start. I just don't want to see masks all year. If there's nothing in our community that shows that we need to have, it really is up to the parents how they want to treat their own children medically. And we have lots of incidents in our schools where we know kids need medication and need treatment, and yet we can't make the parents do it. I know this seems like it's a different thing, but I don't want to see masks all year if it's not needed, and I want data to show that it is needed if we keep on with it. So, and I don't want St. Louis County data because that's not us. I think if we keep our own records, I think that would be better. But I appreciate all the hard work. This plan looks good, I think, to start the year off. And for the record, some people think that we give you all the power to make these decisions, but in reality, if we don't like the decisions that are made, we as a board can direct you otherwise. And I know you always bring your information to us, and we as a board come up with a consensus as to yay or nay, and so appreciate that. And I just want to set this record straight that, we all have voice in this, but we're the ones that are directing you or approving or disapproving. Appreciate your work, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions? Thank you for your engagement with the community, for your direction. This would be going out to staff tomorrow morning, 7:30 a.m. Would be going out to the community by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Chris. Thank you.
So then we'll be moving to 2.03. First reading, policy ACA sexual harassment under Title IX. Dr. Michael Chance.
Good evening, board members. I intend to highlight some of the major components of policy ACA sexual harassment under Title IX. This is a very large, extensive policy. I'm not going to read the entire policy, just highlight some key points for you and answer any questions you may have. MSBA has created this policy in response to new regulations issued by the U.S. Department of Education, interpreting Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, the federal law commonly known as Title IX. These protections do apply to both students and staff. While Title IX is more commonly known for expanding athletic opportunities for female students, the Supreme Court has found that public school districts violate Title IX if they are deliberately indifferent to known acts of sexual harassment in the district's programs and activities. The Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education issued new regulations in 2020 that prohibit school districts from disciplining an employee or students accused of sexual harassment prior to the completion of a detailed grievance process. Sexual harassment is a growing concern in education. This policy applies only to the most extreme types of sexual harassment. Also addresses actual knowledge of sexual harassment, is defined broadly. The regulations clarify this issue by defining the term to mean notice of sexual harassment or allegations of sexual harassment. Previously, it was someone who could do something about the allegation needed to know. Now it's any employee in the district. If they become aware, then the district is responsible for acting. It also requires the district to designate a Title IX coordinator and indicates that any official of the district who has authority to institute corrective measures on behalf of the district. This policy applies to retaliation. In other words, the regulations not only prohibit sexual harassment and discrimination on the basis of sex, but also retaliation, which is defined broadly. The district or person cannot intimidate, threaten, coerce, or discriminate against any individual for the purpose of interfering with any right or privilege secured by Title IX, or because the individual has made a report or a complaint, or because they participated in a Title IX process. The district, as I mentioned, must designate a Title IX coordinator and refer to the designated person as the district Title IX coordinator. Many different people also have to be involved, which is different from other processes that we already have in place. For example, in policy AC, the compliance coordinator receives the complaints, investigates the complaints, and determines whether discrimination occurred. However, in the new Title IX regulation, it requires the people designated to receive and investigate complaints to be different than the decision maker and different from the decision maker on appeal. And each person must receive specific training. Alleged perpetrators cannot be disciplined until the entire process has been completed. The district may provide, and actually should provide, supportive measures to both complainant and respondents. The regulation make it clear that the grievance process must be concluded before the respondent is disciplined or otherwise sanctioned. This may be difficult, particularly when student behavior is involved, because it could take many months for this process to be completed. Regulations do allow the district to remove the respondent after conducting a safety and risk analysis, but only if the district determines that the accused is an immediate threat to the physical health or safety of any person. The allegation of sexual harassment justifies removal, and the respondent is provided notice and an opportunity to challenge the removal immediately following the removal. Placing an employee on administrative leave is also allowed, and no detailed process is required in that case. Either party involved can also have an advisor and should be notified that their advisor can attend any meeting as part of the investigation. So no longer can an investigator talk to a respondent without the presence of their advisor if they choose to have an advisor. Informal resolutions are allowed if both parties consent. However, that process cannot be used, the informal process cannot be used to resolve an allegation that an employee sexually harassed a student. These regulations are controversial. Court cases have already been filed in opposition to the law, and it is likely that there will be more litigation, and this policy may see revisions, recommended revisions within the next year or so. I'm open to any specific questions you may have.
So board members, this is a follow-up to the session that we had with the attorneys. There was a session that the administrators went through with Dr. LaChance and the attorneys last week during our retreat. This is considered the first reading of this policy. If you have any questions either now or between now and business meeting next week, feel free to reach out to Dr. LaChance or to me. To be in line with statute, we would be moving forward with second reading and approval next week.
So who would be our appointed person?
Dr. LaChance would be our Title IX coordinator. But there would be a number of other staff members involved in that process on the student side as well as the staff side. While there's the Title IX coordinator, but there are also investigators and decision makers, and that would involve upwards of 4 or 5 additional staff members.
And that's already been determined who would do that, or is it different for each case?
So we could share that information with you next week. The conversations have started, like involving Ms. Hahn on student-related matters, involving Mr. Love. I can have the full list of staff for the board next week.
I just think we should know in case someone asks.
We provided, our administrators general guidelines that we'll use for each one of those. But as you kind of stated, we will need to look at each case individually, because if there's conflict of interest, we've got to be flexible enough to assign a different investigator. Typically, we would have more than one investigator, as well as that could implicate changes for the decision maker or even the appeals person.
So as I understand it, since he's going to be the person, it has to be in his job title, correct?
It does.
So the job title has to change to show that.
And you'll see, similar to policy AC, the discrimination and harassment policy, this policy also provides a provision in the event that I'm not available. And in the current case, it's listed that the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services also can function in that coordinator position.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. LaChance.
Thank you.
Moving through 3.0 agenda review and 3.01 policy edits.
Yeah, so board members, there's a policy edit that will be coming to you next week as well, and I've asked Dr. LaChance to speak on it.
So in conversations with our attorneys related to increased activity in the region regarding litigation, there were recommendations to review our staff conduct policy and compare our staff conduct policy to the MSBA staff conduct policy, and really to ensure
that we were addressing the three components that you'll see there regarding maintaining courteous and professional relationships with students, parents, guardians, and other district employees and the public as an affirmative statement in our staff conduct policy. There are increased activity in all organizations where staff members are struggling to meet this demand in the current climate of our society. Also activity for actively participating in professional development and obtain information necessary to effectively perform the employee's job duties as another way to affirmatively say that participation and actively implementing professional development that is learned is an affirmative statement and an expectation. And then unless otherwise allowed by law, employees may not engage in political campaigning during the workday and during times when they are performing their official duties. We really want to ensure that our staff members are focused on the needs of our students. And although each of us live with our own political beliefs, we're not using our time to campaign actively when we're here to meet the needs of our students. So we want to address these in our staff conduct policy.
It always brought to my attention that when Katie Harrison was here, that she was on top of the emails that went out that were inappropriate, like people trying to sell things or express political views and stuff, and she would put a hammer on it right away. Who is supposed to be doing that now? And I understand it's not being done very well.
Yeah, so we can look into that. We do have a person that's over Google. Sandra Bush is in the IT department.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. LaChance.
Thank you.
Moving on to 3.02, proposed agenda for the regular business Board of Education meeting.
So, yeah, so board members, Mr. Smith has pulled up the agenda for next week. So we'll have our set of reports to start each meeting. We do not have a school of the month next week. When we get to business items, Dr. Green and Dr. Haywood, we're going to be doing our first day of school planning report a little bit differently. Dr. Green and Dr. Haywood are going to be delivering first day of school at Ritenour High School, what that's going to be, all the preparation that's gone into preparing this building, the staff, and the students for the first day of school. So I look forward to hearing from Dr. Green and Dr. Haywood. Mr. Sanker will give a transportation update. Every year, the Missouri Ethics Commission has a conflict of interest policy, and board members are to readopt the conflict of interest policy each year. So that's on the agenda for next week. The second reading and approval of the Title IX policy is coming to the board next week for your consideration and approval. We have a St. John's Bank signature authorization. This is a piece that has to go through the board to have dual signatures on checks from St. John's Bank. So Mr. Lindhorst is going to be making this procedural recommendation. It is not something that can be done without board approval. We'll have the St. Louis Community College agreement for dual enrollment. We bring that to the board if there's a change in the cost for the classes. And so we'll be bringing that to you next week for your attention and your approval. There was a slight change in the cost for the in-person classes here at Ritenour High School, as well as for the classes that are on the campus in Flow Valley. Dr. LaChance will have a personnel list, and then there's space for board member comments in the open session. On the consent agenda, the GBCB edit that you just saw will be coming to you for your consideration. The transportation program eval will be coming to you. We do have to appoint Dr. LaChance as the Title IX coordinator, and as Ruth had shared, that would have an impact on his title. We do have to appoint an ELL coordinator each year, and that's Ms. Hahn. We also do have to appoint a foster care liaison each year, and that's Ms. Hahn. And there'll be the regular treasurer's items, CFO items that will be coming to you for your consideration also. And that's the agenda for next week.
Any questions? All right, are we ready to move to our special meeting?
I'd like to bring up a couple things if I can while we're still open.
Absolutely.
I just found out tonight that the Girl Scouts are collecting tops of these bottles and lids for like butter containers, everything. They're going to make a bench in honor of Ashley. And I don't know where it's going to go, but you save all these things and get so much and send it into some company, and they'll make it's called a buddy bench, I think is what it's called, and then they're going to place it somewhere. I don't know if they're placing it somewhere in Overland or if they'll place it within our district. So start saving these.
Cool.
I think that's an awesome thing. And then Saturday, at the Overland Farmers Market, the Kiwanis Club will be giving away backpacks. So I think they're shooting for 100. I had to leave before the meeting really got started tonight, but I believe that's what it was. And I think
What time will they be there?
Pardon me, it's from
What time?
8 to 12,
8
but
to
I think
12.
they said last year when they did it, like the first hour, they were all gone. So, I'm new to this organization, so that's the best I can do for you right now. But anyway.
So tell them 8 to 9, so then that way everybody gets it early.
Everybody gets
Yeah.
right, just to make sure everybody has that opportunity, because it's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. So,
All
thank
right.
you.
No
Thank you.
problem. Anybody else? Okay, well, 1.01 call to order. 1.02 declare quorum. We need to excuse
A
somebody.
motion to excuse Ms. Vanessa Pembroke Enriquez.
Okay, second.
Second.
All right. Dr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Lonis?
Yes.
Mr. Garden?
Yes.
Ms. Glover Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Belkacem?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion carries.
I make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
All right, Dr. Thomas?
Yes.
Ms. Lonis?
Yes.
Mr. Garden?
Yes.
Ms. Glover Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Belkacem?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Moving to 1.04. District 2021-2022 calendar changes to include Juneteenth and National Independence Day. Dr. Michael Chance?
Board members, I recommend that the district calendar be revised to include June 19th. Juneteenth, National Independence Day, a federal holiday, which is a federal holiday. June 19, 2022 falls on a Sunday. Therefore, the district will be closed on Monday, June 20th of 2022. And all 11 and 12-month Ritenour employees will have a paid holiday if the board approves the recommendation.
So board members, if you approve this tonight, this would be built into the guidance that the calendar committee considers moving forward. It is a federal holiday. We would desire to have our school calendar to be in line with federal holidays.
So this would just be like summer school, everything. Okay.
So at June 19th, at that point, summer school would be the only thing that we would have going on in the district.
It would impact summer school.
Sorry.
It would impact summer school because of it. They'd be off on Monday, not really going to go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Summer school is generally 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And so if it were, a Friday, that's generally a day off as is.
Yeah, but you're saying we're going to recognize it for Monday.
Correct.
So then is summer school going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or just be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday?
So typically we would treat this like we do July 4th. So when that holiday's on a Monday, we don't hold class, and we would move. Typically, we move it to Tuesday through Friday of that week.
Oh, you would? So
We would
Friday
move
pick
summer-
up the day for Monday.
Yeah, we would move summer school to not land on the holiday like we do 4th of July. If that makes
Friday.
sense.
It'd still be 4 days a week.
Still be 4 days a
Okay,
week.
that's what I was asking.
Yep.
Yeah.
We aim for 20 days, so there's been years where we've been very flexible, depending upon when the holiday lands.
Okay, thank you.
So I make a motion to approve the revised academic calendar for the 2021-2022 school year as presented.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Gilberto?
Yes.
Ms. Glover Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Garden?
Yes.
Mrs. Lawrence?
Yes.
Dr. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am.
And I vote yes. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Moving on to 1.05, personnel recommendations. Back to Dr. Lachance.
Thank you, board
Don't go
members.
anywhere.
I'm here to present personnel items 1 through 29 for your consideration. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Number 8. Looking at the related experience. Is they were employed at a school district and went back, or is there a story there, or is it just?
So going back, they had a 1-year position based on a request for a 1-year leave. And he was asked if he could fill that position, and they responded positively to reference checks related to that. So then that person returned to their position this year. So then they were available this year.
And was our band director?
And
in this
director
process?
and our middle school staff were included in the interviews. Or I should say that be more, yes, middle school music staff were included in the interviews. I do want to point out to the board that you'll notice with the Delta that many contracts are 1-year contracts offered at this point as well for those professional staff.
This time I move we accept recommendations 1 through 29 as presented to the board this night.
Second?
All right, Mrs. Gilberto?
Yes.
Ms. Glover Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Garden?
Yes.
Ms. Lomas?
Yes.
Dr. Thomas?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you.
Moving on to 2.01.
Move we adjourn.
Second?
Dr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Lomas?
Yes.
Mr. Garden?
Yes.
Ms. Glover Jones? Ms. Gilberto?
Yes.
And I vote yes. We adjourn. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As the song says, you don't have to go home.